speaking of which, just because like I love the product stories, were there any decisions that you look back on that you, because there was competition, right? It wasn't just you guys in the beginning and then you broke out. Any product decisions or strategic decisions that you made that you can point to? You're like, thank God we did this thing A or B because that drove the outcome.
Yeah. Do you want it's a little technical and complicated. Is the audience cool with that?
Yeah, I mean, take us down is if I can keep up. I'm sure most of our audience can, but no, it just take us down as much as you can. But I'm sure people would want to nerd out on it.
Yeah. So I think the most successful decision we made was actually owning the interface, like actually the physical design and owning the client side. And so what that means is when we first started, we were this transparent infrastructure provider. And so the consumer had no idea who we were. And so say you were a fintech app, you would collect the necessary credentials for the consumer. You would send that to your system. You would send that to Plaid. Plaid would do what it needs to do and send you back the data.
So just to give the use case here. So Venmo, I have Bank of America and I'm signing up for Venmo for the first time. I need to deposit money into my Venmo account. Venmo is a customer of Plaid's. And so the integration that ends up happening is powered by Plaid, and Plaid has the infrastructure that will go integrate into my bank and help deposit the money into Venmo, right? Is that fair characterization?
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely close to it. And so what you need to do is, let's say you bank with JP Morgan, you need to hook up your JP Morgan account to Venmo, and so Venmo can pull money and send it to Zach. And so what happened is you didn't know as a consumer that Plaid existed in that flow. And we realized that this was kind of problematic because as a consumer, you were not getting the same experience hooking up your bank account to Venmo as you were when you hooked up your account to Square Cash, to Chime, to Coinbase, or whatever. And that had a lot of issues. It had a lot of security issues, but also had conversion issues because every application thought that their design was best or whatnot. And so what we decided to do is we actually made them kind of display a Plaid designed UI to the consumer.
And they, in this case, was Venmo or whoever your actual customer was. They had to, and you guys actually had the logo as well, right? It wasn't just the UI, it became the brand too.
Exactly. And so we kind of made the application insert our branding, our logo, and all experience into the application. And that was extraordinarily controversial, as you can imagine, because these applications want to control the experience. And I totally empathize with them. But I think for us, when we recognized that we needed to establish some level of relationship with the consumer and provide uniformity across these applications, because we were the only one focused this hard on conversion. And what we found is when we did that, it actually started converting a lot better. And the consumer actually started to feel comfortable, like, hey, I know this screen, I've seen this before. And it also allowed us to do a lot of micro optimizations around messaging certain banks, and just allowed us to kind of have a platform that we could actually deliver content and software directly to the consumer. And it was never to actually cut the application out, but it was more to actually deliver a better service to them. And now 100% of traffic flows this way. And it's actually one of the only reasons that we have good relationships with the banks, because those sensitive data never actually hits the application anymore. And we can also, if a bank wants to make you accept some terms of service or something like that, we can deploy that instantly. Or if a bank, we need to take down for a second, we can immediately do that. And so it allows us kind of instant flexibility, but it was a very, very challenging rollout. It took almost 18 to 24 months. There was a lot of pushback to it. But I think if we didn't do that, consumers would have a good enough experience. Also, we also would have got commoditized, and it would have been really easy for these applications to switch it out. It would have just been a worse experience for everybody. But I think that, I'd say, probably generated like 90% of our market cap today.
One of the things we were talking about before you jumped on is like the culture of execution at a smaller, nimble company versus a Google. I mean, kind of the classic combo, but you just had like a really interesting example, right? Like you build this new UI, this new workflow is controversial. You've got to go roll it out to all your customers over like 18 to 24 months. You expect feedback that's not necessarily so positive and nice all the time. How do you do it? Like, how did you organize it? How did you think through that problem? What would you change?
And when in the process, right? Because like if you did it too early, they would have been like, fuck off. We're going to go work with these other people, right?
And I think this may sound controversial, but I think this is kind of why founder-led companies win a lot. Is it was not a popular decision, right? You look at any sort of metric, you're like, okay, we're gonna like pull consumers, and consumers are like, I don't care about this. You pull our customers and like, I objectively don't want this. You pull the banks and they're like, we're not even going to respond to your survey, and you could clearly pull your employees, and you're like, well, this is obviously bad. And it was just something, I'll be honest, that I just felt very strongly about. And, we were young enough that you can just make these high conviction bets and you say, I think this is right. I can't back it up with data, but we're just going to do this. And that was kind of how it works. And that's what we did. And I think it was a controversial decision for 3 or 4 years. And I think now it's definitely the right answer, but it was just something that you had to have conviction and just go with. I think it was also, we just knew, like, I think as a founder, as an early employee, you just have so much fine-grained, nuanced knowledge about this area that nobody else spends time on. And I see this with founders a lot, is when they go try to do product interviews or customer interviews, they're assuming that the people they're interviewing has similar knowledge, interest, or insight to them. And that's just not the case. And so we just felt like there was a bit of an arbitrage where we kind of knew where the industry was going to play out. We knew what the banks were going to react. And so we just made the gut and did it.
Did you personally oversee it? Did you like the rollout? Did you have a deputy who did it? How did you handle the actual operation?
We made it when we were small enough that I just did it myself. And I do think when you have to roll out something as high conviction on that, is you need to be responsible. You need to say like, hey, this is my decision and I'm just going to push this through. I think a lot of times people are too obsessed with consensus, and consensus can actually make product decisions slower and less effectual. It also allows you to distribute blame more, which is a bad thing. And I think you need to understand ahead of time, like, hey, who owns this thing and who is the decision maker? And in that situation, it was me. And we're just going to do this. And like, if it messes up, it's my fault. Nobody else's problem. But here's what we're going to do, and we're going to go do it. I tend to, this is probably a little less popular. I do think when you're a smaller company, it needs to be a little bit more command and control. From a product perspective. As you get larger and your workforce gets a bit more distributed, you obviously need to start deputizing people and passing ownership around. But for the first couple years, you need to kind of suffer through some of these problems through force of will.
Well, you're telling me that you don't think every member of the DAO should vote on every product decision at all times, especially in the beginning?
Yeah, the tragedy of the commons is real. It's a real thing. And we're just starting to realize that now.
Well, it's Zach. He's not saying the customers in the DAO case, the customers are going to vote, and then they're going to tell so it's the employee. Yeah, it's this big circular thing.
Right. No, that's definitely better. That's totally, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the alignment with the customers being the employees is all that makes it a lot better. No, it's interesting. I mean, I will say. There's kind of this like fuck you mindset that the best founders that I've worked with have, that are kind of like, hey, this came from nothing. And it was just me and my co-founders in the early days. And so I could burn it down to nothing and I'll be fine. That was where it was when I started, right? Versus the whole John Scully coming into Apple as the professional manager, right? And the ability to make those decisions. You almost feel more of a steward for someone else's product, right? Versus if it's your own, you're kind of like, well, we were making this up as we were going along or in the early days. And so I'm just going to keep making it up, even if it's at a bigger scale, right? So I think there's this attitude that founders could have that just leads you out of these, I don't know, in these traps that like a business school textbook would tell you to avoid.
It's a really hard balance because, what it takes to be a really good founder for 10 employees is very different than 100, which is very different than a couple thousand. And because, in the early days, you need to be like kind of dictatorial. You need to be extremely opinionated. Consensus is the worst. And then when you're 1,000, if you're a micromanager and you're trying to make every single decision, it's going to be terrible. And so as a founder, you need to kind of make this shift to like, hey, when is it my decision versus when I'm empowering people? And I think a lot of people don't really succeed in that transition. And I think a lot of times people don't really recognize. I mean, look, if you look at Zenefits, if you look at Uber, you had these founders that were just like exceedingly incredible up to a point, and then they just like didn't morph well enough. But it's kind of hard when you're a founder. You're like, when do I change? Like, when do I go from like being a crazy, like when is being like opinionated and having a strong product conviction, when does that turn into like insane micromanagement? I don't know. It's kind of hard. And so you just kind of have to naturally make that transition.